Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's completely unplanned Law of Self-Defense show. Didn't expect to be doing this today, but here we are because a bunch of people have sent me some interesting video of President Trump giving a speech recently, I guess. And it raised some interesting legal issues, particularly around looting. So how this video clip is being propagated is on the grounds that President Trump is essentially advocating that looters be shot. Looters shot on site, summarily shot for looting. And I don't know if that's what he meant to say or if that's his intent. That's not actually what he says. But there are some terms of art around this emotional concept of shooting looting, because that's what it is, folks. Because there's no statute I'm aware of that allows you to shoot people for looting. But looting is a Venn diagram that overlaps with some other crimes. And those other crimes may allow for the use of deadly defensive force. But those are the kind of legal nuances I wanted to step through with all of you today to try to bring some clarity to these discussions. I know given the tsunami of property crimes we've been experiencing as a nation, thanks largely to George Soros financed prosecutors who simply allow waves of thieves to come into commercial establishments and walk out with all the property, steal all the property without any consequences. I understand that many of us would like it to be lawful to shoot people we observe looting. In fact, the law is more nuanced than that. So with that out of the way as a preface and giving people a chance, let me make sure I'm streaming everywhere I need to be streaming, and we'll launch the formal start of today's show. So Law of Self-Defense members, we're up. YouTube is up. Twitter is up. How about that? And Rumble, you never really know what Rumble is doing. I just can't tell. So maybe I messed up Rumble. If I did, my apologies for, oh no, there it goes. All right, finally. All right, so let me go ahead with the launch of today's show, and then we'll start stepping through the legalese and translating it into plain English. And of course, I'll share the video clip of Trump that I've been referring to. Here we go. All right, welcome, guys. Welcome. We're going to cover this Trump advocates we shoot looters video clip. And before I do, of course, I should make a mention. There's only a few days left now for this. A week from today, we're having our Law of Self-Defense advanced class. This is our full-day course on the laws that privilege you to use force and deadly force in defense of yourself, in defense of your family, in defense of strangers, in defense of property. We cover all that. We cover interacting with the police in the aftermath of a use of force event. We talk about weapons modifications and the legal implications of that. We talk about how you can craft your own customized, legally sound self-defense strategy so you can be decisive and effective in the physical defense of self-defense. We talk about how the legal system really treats claimed cases of self-defense, what you have to do as a defendant, what the prosecutor has to do to overcome your claim of self-defense, all that and much, much more. This is the last advanced class for 2023, folks. We're not teaching it again until spring of 2024. You can learn more at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. The class is next Saturday, October 7th. I have a little banner here, I think. There it is. And if you can't make the Saturday, October 7th date, I would urge you to register anyway, because we will make the playback recording of the whole day available to every registered student. So if Saturday is no good for you, just register anyway. We'll send you an email after the class with the link to look at the recording, and that'll be up for at least a couple weeks afterwards so you can view the content at your leisure. And if you did attend on Saturday, you'll also get the link, and you can review portions, watch them again if you wish. And if you go to that page, lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. This is the web page to register. You can still save up to 50% on your ticket. And all these many red bullet points, more than 100 red bullet points, reflect specific use of force legal issues that we explain in plain English over the course of the day. And then we have essentially unlimited Q&A at the end of the class to make sure there's no ambiguity left among any students. Again, we're not doing this class again until spring 2024, folks. If you missed this one, can you afford to wait 6 months before learning what the legal boundaries of self-defense are, given our increasingly violent society? I would suggest not. I would suggest you go grab your ticket right now at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. All right. Let's take a look at what President Trump has to say about especially commercial thievery that's been taking place. So what he's referring to here are largely these mobs of people who go into, say, a retail establishment, working in concert. It's a gang, organized retail theft, I think is a technical name for it. And they go into these stores and they just walk out with armfuls or shopping cartfuls or rackfuls of clothes or whatever other items they're interested in. And they wipe these stores out to a large extent. And especially in the George Soros district attorney, prosecutor districts, nothing's done about this. They've basically decriminalized property theft crimes in those jurisdictions. It doesn't even bother arresting anybody or trying to stop them. And of course, just as you might imagine, just guts these retail districts. I mean, Target's just announced this week they're closing stores in many of these Soros prosecutor jurisdictions. Whole Target stores shutting down because they just can't afford to operate under these conditions, these lawless conditions. So that's what I believe Trump is addressing here. Very short clip. It's only about 30 seconds long. I'll go ahead and play it, and then we'll start to work our way through the actual legal dynamics of shooting looters.
Oh, I can't believe. These people are killing people when they go into the stores. You'll have 300 young people who are not looking for a good future walk into a store, big department store, and just pillage it. And if you happen to be there when they're there, they'll knock the hell out of you and kill you in some cases. And we will immediately stop all of the pillaging and theft. Very simply, if you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store.
Okay, so first thing I should point out is that President Trump doesn't say if you are looting a store. He says if you are robbing a store. And robbing and looting are not the same things. Looting is generally defined criminally as a form of burglary. In fact, because Trump is from Florida, I'm going to use Florida statutes to illustrate these distinctions between looting, burglary, robbery, and then there's and theft, retail theft, what we normally think of as shoplifting, but of course being done on a massive organized scale. Now, we'll look at all those under Florida law. And I also want to point out that there's a temporal element here in Trump's statement. In fact, let me play the critical portion again so we catch that.
Immediately stop all of the pillaging and theft. Very simply, if you rob a store, you can fully expect to be shot as you are leaving that store.
Listen to that applause, huh? I imagine many people feel, certainly emotionally, like these gangs looting these retail establishments should be subject to deadly force as a consequence for their thieving conduct. But let's begin to work through some of what we're talking about. So shot means, of course, the use of, deadly defensive force. There are circumstances in which you are legally privileged to use deadly defensive force against another person, even if it means they lose their life. Florida, for example, has statutes for the use of deadly defensive force to defend against deadly force, unlawful deadly force harm, if you meet the proper conditions. So the relevant statute is Florida Statute 776012. The first paragraph is about non-deadly defensive force. The second paragraph is about deadly defensive force. And it says, see if I can make it a little even bigger here. A person is justified in using or threatening to use deadly force if he reasonably believes that using such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself or another. All right, so you can use deadly defensive force to prevent a deadly force attack upon you, to neutralize a deadly force upon you or some other person. So a deadly force threat to an unlawful deadly force threat to a human can be lawfully neutralized with the use of deadly defensive force. Fair enough. But then the statute continues, or to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony. So it's not just that you're defending life against death that privileges you to use deadly defensive force. You can always also use deadly defensive force to prevent a forcible felony. Well, that's interesting. So it would be worth knowing what a forcible felony is then. And fortunately, Florida has a statute on that too. 77608, forcible felony means treason, murder, manslaughter, sexual battery, carjacking, home invasion, robbery, burglary, arson, kidnapping, aggravated assault, aggravated battery, aggravated stalking, aircraft piracy, unlawful throwing, placing, or discharging of a destructive device or bomb, and any other felony which involves the use or threat of physical force or violence against any individual. So when we look at the statute and consider it closely, it might have seemed before that you could use deadly force to stop a threat to persons, and then forcible felonies was like a category of crime that did not involve a threat to persons, right? A different bucket. But if you look at the actual enumerated list of forcible felonies, most of these inherently involve a threat to persons. They're not really property crimes. We list some here like robbery, burglary, arson. We may think of those as property crimes, right? You burglarize a home. You commit arson of a structure. But the reason they're forcible felonies in the way the law means here now is that there's an intrinsic threat to human life in the form of these felonies, these forcible felonies. There's force being threatened against persons. In the case of a burglary, for example, the implicit force against persons is, well, you're in a dwelling where other people reside, and you could well encounter those other people, and you would expect then violence to result, right? In the case of arson, people live in structures. So if you set fire to a structure, you're threatening fires run out of control. Indeed, that's what the arsonist is hoping for. So that's an implicit threat to the people inside the structure. And of course, fires jump from one structure to another if they're adjacent to each other. And if there's not people in this building, there's likely people in the next building. Kidnapping, obviously, assault and battery are crimes against people, stalking, aircraft piracy. What we're concerned about is the people in the aircraft. Some of these things involve highly defensible property crimes like carjacking, home invasion, robbery. What's really being protected there is not the car or the home, it's the people inside the car or the home. So again, it's really a personal crime. Murder, manslaughter, sexual battery, all personal crimes. And even the catch-all phrase at the end, which involves the use or threat of physical force or violence against any individual. So the catch-all at the end is, again, personal crime, right? Violence against an individual. So Trump in his video says robbery. He doesn't say looting, he says robbery. And robbery is one of these enumerated forcible felonies for which the use of deadly defensive force would be warranted under the Florida self-defense statute, right? Which is here. So you can use or threaten to use deadly force to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony, and robbery is a forcible felony. So Trump is saying, well, if you rob a store, we're going to shoot you. Unfortunately, it says we're going to shoot you on the way out. Arguably, that's no longer the imminent commission of a forcible felony. Imminent meaning it's immediately about to happen. Now, you might argue that in some respects, the robbery would be said to be still in progress. So the robber, if he's charged with robbery, the duration of the robbery generally includes flight from the scene with the stolen property. So in terms of the robber's criminal liability, he's still in the commission of robbery when he's fleeing. But we have to be careful because technical terms of art often mean different things in different contexts. So is what the legislature here envisioning that as they're out of the store, they're running down the street, Are they still in the commission of a robbery for use of force law purposes? Because that's a different circumstances than if they are in the midst of the robbery. And by the way, what is a robbery? Because most of these people that Trump was referring to more generally are not, in fact, robbing the store. They're stealing from the store, but robbery and thievery are not the same things. In fact, I have a Florida statute here on robbery. And here it is. I'm not going to go into all the detail. I'll just share the general definition to clarify how robbery and looting and thievery are different things. So robbery means the taking of money or other property, which may be the subject of larceny from the person or custody of another, larceny being a thieving, with intent to permanently or temporarily deprive the person owner of the money or property, when in the course of the taking, there is the use of force, violence, or assault, or putting in fear. So the robber, for it to be robbery, you're threatening somebody. There's a personal interaction. An armed robber would be the classic example, right? They step out from an alley, they point a gun at you, they say, "Give me your wallet or I'll shoot you." Well, they're using force, violence, assault, putting in fear to facilitate the taking of the property. That's different than if they were a pickpocket, right? They're still stealing, still larceny, but they're not using force, violence, assault, or putting in fear, arguably. So robbery requires this personal interaction. If a gang of people go into a store and unlawfully grab racks of clothes and roll them out of the store for the purpose of converting those clothes to their own use, right? They're stealing for sure. There's no question about it. But they don't threaten anybody with force, violence, assault, or putting in fear, then arguably that's not a robbery because that personal interaction did not occur. What would it be if it's not a robbery? Well, Florida has a law about that too. There is, of course, the crime of theft, which is merely converting other person's property to your own purpose. Taking control and possession of someone else's property unlawfully. That would simply be thievery, larceny, theft. It doesn't require a personal interaction. It's a different crime than robbery. Robbery is basically the thievery with this threat of violence, with that personal interaction. But retail theft has always been put in its own unique category, has its own unique provisions. And the Florida law on retail theft in particular was recently updated within the last couple of years to reflect the increasing frequency of these large-scale mobs going into stores and pillaging them. And this is that Florida statute. 812015, retail and farm theft. So they start with a bunch of definitions. Retail theft means the taking possession of or carrying away of merchandise, property, money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or removing a shopping cart with intent to deprive the merchant of possession, use, benefit, or full retail value. So that's what's happening in these cases, right? It's retail theft. And then Florida got tired of the large-scale organized retail theft rings, so they started adding in, let's see, let's see if they define the basic retail theft. So a simple individual shoplifting, right? First time offender. Petty theft under a certain dollar amount. Upon a second or subsequent conviction, I don't see where it says first conviction. Maybe they give you a pass on the first one. A fine of not less than $50, not more than $1,000. May be required to do public service. I don't even see anything about any jail time, much less prison time. But let's see, where is the section I'm looking for? Oh, here we go. But everything pops up to a felony level if, let's see. Well, I'll go straight to this bottom section. I saw it there. Oh, this is the first one. So a person who commits a retail theft commits a felony in the third degree if the person, individually or in concert with one or more other persons, coordinates the activities. So it's an organized retail theft ring. It bumps things up from, a simple shoplifting was nothing. I mean, it was a fine. Now it's a third degree felony if it's part of an organized crime ring. Let's see. What do you get for a third degree felony? 5 years, up to 5 years in prison for a third degree felony. And then if you're part of an organized in concert with one or more other persons, you take property in excess of $3,000, then it becomes a second degree felony. And I believe second degree felony is good for 30 years. Let me take a look. Uh, 15 years for a second degree felony and a $10,000 fine. So quite a bit more than, $50 to $1,000 without even any jail time, right? Third degree felony, second degree felony. But there's nothing here about the privileged use of deadly defensive force to prevent this from happening. It's not a robbery, which is what Trump was speaking to, because there's no interaction with persons required for this crime. And there's no provision for and it's not one of the enumerated forcible felonies under Florida law. Here. And if there's no interaction, which is what we're presuming to differentiate this from robbery, it's not a felony which involves the use or threat of physical force or violence against an individual, right? They're just walking in and walking out with the merchandise. So that wouldn't privilege under Florida law the use of deadly defensive force by anybody. Then we get to the question of what actually is looting. Some states define looting explicitly, but many states, I find, define looting as a form of burglary. Here we have Florida's statute on burglary. Now, the thing with burglary is that it's a taking of property from within some kind of structure or vessel. So it's a home, a dwelling, some kind of enclosed structure, or it could sometimes be a vehicle. A car, a truck, a ship, I guess. And so someone has to intrude into that structure for the purpose of committing some other crime, typically a taking of property. If there's no invasion of the structure, there's no burglary, right? So if you just left a piece of property out in your front yard and someone steals it, they still committed a crime, but they did not commit a burglary. Well, imagine if there was, and also I should point out that another characteristic of looting is it's generally defined as being within the context of some kind of natural disaster, and people are taking advantage of the natural disaster, or it could be a riot, some kind of broad event, and people are taking advantage of the lack of normal structure, law enforcement, the overwhelming of society's normal protections against property theft. Looters are people who are stealing property in that circumstance. Okay. Now you can imagine that there was flooding or a hurricane and somebody in Florida had piled up emergency water supplies, bottles of water on pallets in their backyard. Well, if someone comes and tries to steal those pallets, and then the homeowner, the neighborhood's evacuated, the pallets of water are left there. And while the homeowner's away, some stranger from outside the community comes, sees the water, steals the water. I would argue they're looting. They're converting property in the context of that natural disaster that debilitates society's normal means of protecting property, right? They're taking advantage of the natural disaster for the purpose of theft. But they're not committing a burglary. They didn't enter a structure. So burglary and looting are not necessarily the same things. Of course, it is often the case that looting and burglary do overlap. If someone's committing the looting, the theft of the property in the context of a natural disaster, and they're entering structures to do that, I'd argue they're committing both looting and burglary because of the entry of the structure. So how Florida deals with the question of looting is it includes it within the context of burglary, which means there is a structural entry required here for this particular flavor of looting that they're talking about. So, and they just, so they've had different versions of the statutes, and some versions apply before and after certain dates. But the after is after 2001. So we'll take a look at that one. A burglary means entering a dwelling, a structure, or a conveyance with the intent to commit an offense therein. Usually this is a property crime, but it doesn't have to be a property crime. It could be some other offense. Or notwithstanding that you were licensed. Oh, so the person entering did not have license to enter. So they're entering unlawfully, right? For the purpose of committing some other offense. Or even if they entered lawfully into the dwelling, structure, or conveyance, they surreptitiously, with the intent to commit an offense, after permission to remain has been withdrawn, or to commit some forcible felony. I mean, we've already read through the forcible felonies, right? But all three of these scenarios, they entered surreptitiously after permission to remain has been withdrawn, they stayed, or they're there to commit a forcible felony. Not merely some offense, but a forcible felony. But all these have in common entering a dwelling, a structure, or a conveyance. And then we have different degrees of burglary. Burglary is a felony in the first degree if it's done while armed. And first degree felony in Florida is good for 30 years. What if you're not armed? Well, burglary is a felony of the second degree under a variety of scenarios, one of which is the burglary is committed during a riot or an aggravated riot prohibited under the law, and the perpetration of the burglary is facilitated by conditions arising from the riot, or within a county that is subject to a state of emergency declared by the governor after blah, 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 blah. And the perpetration of the burglary is facilitated by the conditions arising from the emergency. The burglary is a felony of the first degree. So if you commit what would normally be a second degree burglary under conditions of riot or state of emergency, natural disaster, it bumps it up from a second degree burglary, 15 years max, to a first degree burglary, 30 years. First degree felony, 30 years max. Then they have, and that's the general scope for a burglary committed not with a weapon, but while someone is present in the structure. An innocent person is present in the structure. There's a lesser degree of burglary if it's committed and there's no one inside the structure. That's normally a third degree felony, but it's bumped. So a third degree was what we just looked, right? 5 years. But this third degree felony is bumped up to a second degree felony if this burglary is committed, no one's in the structure, but it's committed in the context of a riot or a state of emergency. So it bumps it up from a 5-year felony to a 15-year felony. So, and much of this law was actually, it was changed recently. Let's see. I think it was changed in 2021. Let me go back here. Yeah, so we have this change here, April 19th, 2021, and that's reflected here. So this is the bill that went through the legislature that changed the burglary statute. 810.02 is Florida's burglary statute. The parts in green are the new language, and you can see that that's where is reflected during a riot or an aggravated riot. State of emergency, I guess, was already there, but they added the riot provisions because of Antifa and BLM rioting all over the place, right? So they bumped up those versions of burglaries from lower degree felonies to higher degree felonies. So looting as a form of burglary. Well, let's take a look back at now the question would be, these organized retail theft mobs were 30 people, 100 people go into the store and clean it out. There's no state of emergency, let's presume, currently declared. So that wouldn't result in the escalation of the burglary. Would make it a burglary. I guess it would be a burglary anyway, but it's still treated as covered by retail theft laws because of the organized nature of the theft. But there's no state of emergency. And is it a riot? Is there a riot taking place? Is the entry itself the riot if a particular store is being targeted and not others? Riot, I think of as more generalized disorder in the community, right? Like we see with BLM and Antifa. So unless there's a more generalized riot going on, I don't know that you have these aggravating conditions here, these requirements of riots or state of emergency that would be required for the escalation of these burglaries. And if we look back at the forcible felony definition again, we see that indeed burglary is one of the enumerated forcible felonies for which deadly force could be used. But again, we have to ask the question, the statute actually says to prevent the imminent commission of a forcible felony, to prevent the imminent commission of a burglary. While the burglary is taking place, I guess it's still imminent. But once they're outside the store, are they still engaged in the imminent commission of a burglary? Or is the burglary over? And if it's not still imminent, you wouldn't have this legal privilege to use deadly force to shoot them. So when Trump says, after you've robbed a place, you should expect to get shot, that's a problematic description of what the law allows. Now, having stepped through those legalities, I know many of us contemplate these kinds of organized retail theft rings where stores are getting wiped out. We know how damaging this is to our society. You can't have a functioning society if this is permitted, but these George Soros prosecutors are permitting this. I mean, effectively, they're encouraging it, right? Because if there's only upside and no downside to a behavior, do you get more of it or less of it? So the upside, obviously, is they secure the stolen property for themselves. The thieves do. The downside is nothing. Nothing happens to them. So, of course, it just becomes an positively reinforcing cycle of ever-escalating theft. And these inner cities get gutted. I mean, you won't believe what Denver looks like now. And many cities are much worse. Denver's kind of a couple steps behind. So we know this is terrible and destructive on a societal level. And we'd like it to stop. And if the prosecutors won't do it, do we resort to self-help? Should it be permissible to shoot these people as they're out on the sidewalk having stolen the property? They're rolling the racks of property away. Well, that's just a public policy question, folks. We have all kinds of conditions, like we just saw, where you're privileged to use deadly defensive force. Society doesn't say you're not allowed to kill people. It says you are allowed to kill people under specific conditions. And we just saw a bunch of those in Florida's self-defense law to prevent an innocent from being subject to death or serious bodily injury, and to prevent these enumerated forcible felonies or any other forcible felony that threatens life, threatens people, I should say. So you are allowed to kill people if the proper conditions are met. And one state, Texas, sets as a proper condition the defense of property. That is Texas statute 9.42. Deadly force to protect property. And this is just personal property, folks. This is not highly defensible property. They're not talking here about a home or a business or an occupied vehicle. They do have laws that address that too. They're talking here just stuff. The barbecue in your backyard, your cell phone, an unoccupied car, a pet is personal property. And Texas has provisions for the use of deadly force to protect mere personal property. You can kill someone over mere personal property. Texas is the only state that does that. And there are a bunch of hoops and conditions that have to be jumped through here. You'll notice they also have similar enumerated list here: burglary, robbery, aggravated robbery, theft, criminal mischief. Some of these are conditional on time of day during the nighttime, but otherwise a similar list to what Florida had. And the U.S. Supreme Court has no problem with the statute. Any state would be privileged to do this. It's just Texas is the only one that has. But there's nothing stopping any other state that wishes to adopt some version of this statute that allows for the use of deadly force in defense of mere personal property in the absence of a threat to persons. It's the same question for looting, folks. It's just a matter of public policy. Could a state adopt a statute that says looting is now one of the acceptable conditions for the use of deadly defensive force? Sure. Why not? I mean, aircraft piracy is. You could make just about anything. And you could make looting one of those conditions. So could Texas add looting here to this statute? I mean, they may not need to. It may be covered under the already existing enumerated ones. But what if they wanted to make it explicit? They could even include flight from looting, right? To remove any doubt about the temporal question I raised about whether once they're out on the street, is it done? Would that end close the window of eminence in which you'd be permitted to use force? Sure. So for those of you who feel that looting would be a morally appropriate response, looting would be a morally appropriate trigger for the use of lawful, deadly defensive force against the looters, there's no reason your legislature can't adopt a statute like that. I mean, you are, of course, killing over property, but you may judge that, first of all, you may judge that killing over property is fine from a moral perspective. Texas has. You may judge that it's not really just using deadly force to prevent property. It's using deadly force to prevent the destabilization of the entire society. Because you can't have a functional society if mobs of people can just walk into retail establishments and walk out with all the merchandise. I mean, you end up with these, pharmacy stores where every shelf is locked up. And then what they do is they just break the locks when they want to steal. So you may be of the moral opinion that it would be appropriate for looters to be shot, and that would be lawful. The only thing preventing that from being lawful is your legislature. So, I mean, Florida just updated its burglary statutes to account for riots. There's no reason they can't add looting to the conditions that justify the use of deadly defensive force. I don't have a strong moral position on it myself. I don't have any trouble with the Texas law. I wouldn't have a moral problem with a law that allowed looting. Whether or not someone's looting is entirely within their control. If they don't want to be subject to deadly defensive force, all they have to do is not be looting or trying to kill somebody or committing some other forcible felony. Or in Texas, don't be stealing people's stuff. People work hard for their stuff. Their life energy went into acquiring that stuff, right? They had to work to get the resources to acquire that stuff. So we have kind of, it's almost, to me, it's a similar moral question as stand your ground. The duty to retreat states, the states that impose a legal duty to retreat before you can use deadly force in self-defense, what they're essentially saying is, well, we're making a policy decision that we value life over your privilege, even the bad guy's life, right? We concede he's an unlawful, imminent deadly force aggressor, but we still value his life more than we do your privilege to stand your ground and defend yourself. That's explicitly what that public policy is. Now, that position's increasingly abandoned. There's only 11 states left that do that. The other states have said, many of which used to be duty to retreat have switched to stand your ground. And they've said, no, we value your privilege to stand your ground and defend yourself against an imminent deadly force attack more than we do the life of that attacker. Just different public policy choice. And it's definitely trending. Because as I say, in my career, 30 years plus now, there's been a bunch of states that shifted from duty to retreat to stand your ground, and none have gone the other way. So right now, the majority of states, 49 states, have as a public policy position that they value the human life, even of the thief, conceding he's a thief. They value his life more than they do the value of the property being taken. So you can't kill over personal property, except Texas, as we discussed. But that's purely, is the pendulum swinging there too? Are people becoming more amenable to adopting the Texas approach with respect to personal property? Are, given the rampant increase in crime being induced largely by these Soros finance prosecutors, is the public becoming more amenable to saying, you know what, this isn't working. This thing where we value the life of the thief more than we value the property itself that he's taking, that's not working. Things are spinning out of control. We need to deter this kind of property theft and Let's face it, the ultimate deterrence is the use of deadly defensive force. It works for Texas. We should try it too. And then taking the next step and saying, listen, it's not just personal property in an individual sense. It's the taking of property under a looting scenario. Maybe simple shoplifters shouldn't be subject to deadly force, but if it's an organized retail theft ring, yeah, light those people up. They gave up their privilege to stay alive when they became an organized retail theft ring. They could have just not done that. So I don't tell other people what to think, but that's how I would think through that particular problem. Making the, for example, the claim that the person who was killed was engaged in the act of looting in absolute defense against any use of force charge related to that killing. Sorry, it's not a crime. Not a crime to shoot someone who's trying to kill you unlawfully. Not a crime to kill someone who's trying to kill someone else unlawfully, or maim them, or rape them, or kidnap them. Society says it's not a crime to kill people under those circumstances. Texas says it's not a crime to kill someone for stealing your stuff under the required conditions. That's a killing, but it's just not a crime. Every state could adopt that approach if they wanted to. And we could just make it not a crime to shoot looters. Sure, you shot people dead, but it's just not a crime because that's lawful. All right, folks, I wanted to hit this one quick because I know it was in the news and maybe it'll go viral. Who knows? If you have thoughts, please. Before I sign off, I forgot last show to go to the member chat. Law Self-Defense members, they get this stream to their member dashboard. They have a chat function, and that's where I read comments and questions. If you want to post a question or comment in YouTube and have me read it, you need to make it a $10 super chat, folks. Or you could take the smart approach and become a Law Self-Defense member for a month, costs less than $10. And then you get to ask all your questions for free. And you get to get your comments addressed for free, not $10 each, $10 for entire month's worth. And you get access to all our Law Self-Defense member benefits. You can try out membership for just 99 cents for a 2-week trial membership. Get unlimited access. You're just a full member for those 2 weeks. And if you stay a member after that, it's only about 30 cents a day, folks, less than $10 a month. But if you just want to ask one question on YouTube, it's a $10 super chat. So you make the call. You can take advantage of our trial membership at lawofselfdefense.com/trial. All right, let's see what the Law Self-Defense members have to say about this. All the usual suspects here. Good to see you guys and gals. Let's see. Richard says the law needs to be changed to allow deadly force in these situations. America is being destroyed. I think that's a reasonable position. How would Trump's statement not fall under Florida's inclusion of burglary, entry of a structure with the intent? It might. Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think they have a separate law for retail theft. I mean, the element of being an organized retail theft ring, that language is only reflected in the retail theft statute. In the context, and you wonder why. I mean, how do you commit a retail theft without committing a burglary? I'm not sure, actually. So it might, but then the temporal question still remains. For the purpose of use of force law, if they're out on the sidewalk with the stuff after they've robbed, which is the timing Trump put on his statement, are they still committing a robbery, an imminent commission of a robbery? So you can definitely use deadly force to stop, burglary. Burglary is what I meant. You can definitely use deadly force under Florida law to prevent an imminent burglary. But imminent implies it's not yet over, right? For use of force law purposes, an imminent attack, once it's over, the window of imminence is closed. But I mean, the legislature could fix that too. Say burglary or flight therefrom. Just 3 words, or flight therefrom. Just add it to the forcible felony statute. So if you're in hot pursuit, you're in immediate pursuit, they're still engaged in the crime and you still have the privilege to use deadly force. No reason that can't be done. David says, given the mob component, are their actions cumulative, both in the sense of value and in the reasonable threat posed by disparity of numbers, trampling, knockdowns relative to the level of violence, and use of force? I think all that would be true. I think the retail theft statute aggravating factors for a collective organized retail theft ring is looking at the collective value of all the property stolen, not the value only of property stolen by each individual. I believe it's the collective value. So of course, a large group is going to steal large value stuff, right? There, many hands make light work, so to speak. Steve's in the chat. Steve might have thoughts on this overlap between the retail theft statute and the burglary statute, given this is all federal law. And of course, if they're scaring someone, if they're putting someone in reasonable fear of harm, like there's a store employee trying to block the doorway so they can't get out, and they're rushing at that store employee, the store employee's fear may well be the collective harm of all those people operating together. That would be perfectly reasonable. They're not afraid of just one thief. They're afraid of the collection of thieves. It's a higher cumulative degree of force, sure. But if there was nobody blocking there has to be some threat to persons, some objective threat to persons you can point to. If there's nobody if all the store employees are trained and do just step out of the way, right? The corporate told them just step out of the way. And so they're just out of the way and they're safe. And none of them are afraid of physical harm from this mob. And that's what they say when they're interviewed by police, then there's no assault. So if there is an assault, it's the collective aggregate threat of harm for sure. Oh, look at this. It's always great to have local expert knowledge. Steve writes, the definition of riot in this statute, that would be the burglary statute, is being challenged in the federal 11th Circuit. Oral argument will be next Tuesday. Oh, sorry, he says in the Florida Supreme Court. DeSantis v. Dream Defenders. Who are the Dream Defenders, do you imagine? So it's being challenged in the Florida Supreme Court, that definition of rioting in the burglary. And he even provides the full docket. Thanks there, Steve. So if you're a law self-defense member, in the chat is a link to the docket for that appeal to the Florida Supreme Court about DeSantis and the legislature adding those riot conditions to state of emergency as part of the aggravating factors for a burglary. Let's see. Question, if the first, and I guess there's a preliminary injunction against that riot provision at the moment. David says, if the first felon out the door was shot, but the remaining members of the organized mob were still within the property, would not the mob assault still be an active threat? Yeah, I don't, assuming there is an assault at all, if it's still ongoing, it's still an active threat. It doesn't end because you shot one person, necessarily. I mean, I guess everybody could throw up their hands and surrender. And Richard says, it's not working. We need to get this changed. Yeah, I think that's a perfectly reasonable public policy argument to make in any state. All right, folks, I think that's all I wanted to cover today. Don't forget our Law of Self-Defense live online class coming up next Saturday, a week from today. If you can't make the date, register anyway. We're going to make the playback recording available to you so you can watch it at your leisure over the next couple of weeks. You can still save 50% on your ticket. This is the last full day advanced class for 2023, folks. We're not teaching it again until next spring of 2024. Can you afford to wait that long before you learn the actual law of self-defense in our increasingly violent society? I would suggest not. Click over to lawofselfdefense.com/advanced to learn more about this wonderful, wonderful course. I guess I should take a look at super chats since I solicited super chats. Let me take a quick look here. A $2 one. I can't tell if it's from today though or not. No, it's from I guess it's from 2 days ago. C Goody. Thank you, C Goody, for the $2 super chat. I appreciate it. But there's none from today. So we are done with the questions and comments for today's show. I hope it was somewhat informative. And until we meet again, remember, if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.